Right, let's go. Right, thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to the Azure AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals course that we're doing here on Lighthall. This is the first time we've ever done anything like this. I'm going to introduce you to my lovely guest speakers in a second, but let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. So let's move on this slide. So thank you for joining, first of all. Hope you're going to enjoy this. This is going to be an interactive session. So we're going to talk through some slides and then we're going to go through your questions if you've got any. So if you're new to Azure or you've got a little bit of experience in Azure or you've in between and you want to ask questions, type the questions in chat. Just put question : at the start and then ask your question. And in between speakers, we'll stop and we'll ask questions. We'll answer your questions if we can. So first of all, I need to do a quick code of conduct because that's just a good thing to do. So please be respectful at all times. We can kick you out if you misbehave. I don't think anyone will misbehave, but I'm hopeful. Try and be respectful to everyone. If you don't follow the code of conduct, we might have to ask you to leave. Please be respectful and inclusive with everyone and have empathy towards our speakers. We're all nervous. You're all nervous. Don't worry. It's all good. We're just here to enjoy ourselves. Hopefully learn some Azure. So hopefully you enjoy yourselves. We have Q&A during and at the end of each section, so please don't be shy. If we talk about something that isn't clear, please ask, and we'll try and spend some time, and that's what we're here for at the end of the day. Okay, so let me introduce you to our lovely team, and I'm going to start off with Lisa. Do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello. I hope everybody can hear me okay. It's the first time using this setup, so really looking forward to it. My name is Lisa Hoving, and in my daily life, I'm an Azure data engineer. So my specialty is on Azure in the cloud, and then more specifically, gearing towards the data technology stack. So I have specialty in using data storage, like storage accounts or things like databases, SQL Server, and stuff like that. But I'm also specialized in more data platforms like SQL, Synapse Analytics, Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks, and Programming Spark. So I'm really happy to be here today and to help you guys learn Azure.
Awesome. And next up we have Simon. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, cheers. Thanks, Gregor. So I'm Simon. I'm based out of the UK. I'm an Azure engineer. I've been doing Azure full-time for the last just under 2 years. And happy to be a part of this and hopefully give you guys an insight into the AZ-900 course.
Cool. Thank you for that. Right, Matt, you go. Matt Boyd, introduce yourself. Fire away.
Yeah, I'm Matt, an Azure consultant with 18 years of IT experience. The last 6 or so focusing on Azure, where I focus more on the infrastructure side of things, so AKS and VMware and sort of virtual machines, so similar to VMware, and storage. So I have a slightly different skill set to Lisa, who's more focused on the data side of things.
Awesome. And lastly is me. So my name is Gregor Sutty. I am an Azure architect for a company in the Netherlands called Intercept. I'm an Azure MVP and an MCT. It's my pleasure to join these 3 wonderful people so that we can give you some Azure experience and kind of help you learn Azure. So that's us. Let's crack on and let's move on to the next slide. So why should you folks attend? Well, it's free learning, first of all. So we want to try and give our experience towards you to help you learn Azure. So it's free learning. We are some Azure professionals. Most of us work for this company called Intercept. We have got Azure experience. A couple of us have done this exam and other Azure exams. So you're learning with Azure experts, and I think it's a good way to be able to ask questions. Sometimes when you do training, you don't get the chance to ask instructors some questions. So as we go through the exam AZ-900 content, you can ask questions on anything that comes up that you might not understand. So please don't be shy and just ask questions and we'll try and attend it. So that's why you should attend. We've got 3 sessions lined up. We might even do a 4th one. 3 sessions are going to be describe cloud concepts, describe Azure architecture, and the last one is describe Azure management and governance. And that's what makes up the Azure Fundamentals AZ-900 exam. So enough about that. Let's quickly talk about a handy link that I've got here. So if you are thinking about learning Azure and you want to do the exam, which is why you're here, let's be honest, the exam homepage is kind of the best link to start on. So this top link here. That'll take you to the exam page. It'll tell you all about how you go about registering for the exam, how you go about learning a study guide. There's a study guide on there you can see in the second link. There's actually a sandbox where you can spin up and play about with Azure for free, which is really cool. And at the bottom, there's also Microsoft learning paths. So that'll give you some guidance on into each section of what we're about to cover as well. So if you want to do some further learning, definitely have a look at these links. Now, I'll email everybody out these slides at the end of this section 1, probably tomorrow or Thursday. We'll do the same on the next session and the last session as well. And if we've got time, we might do a 4th session on the exam and what you can expect when you actually sit the exam. We'll see if we've got time to do that. So enough about the handy links. Let's start off. Section 1, we're going to cover describing cloud concepts. So the exam itself is split into 3 sections. The first section here is 25 to 30% of the exam score is based off of this section. And I am going to basically hand this over to Lisa, who's going to cover this section. So just let me know, Lisa, when you want me to move forward on the slide.
Okay. Well, I think for obvious reasons, we can move one slide forward.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So what we're going to start with is try to describe cloud computing. And what best way to start describe cloud computing is by starting off with the basics. What is actually the cloud? Gregor, can we? Yeah, thank you so much. So, well, when we start learning about the cloud, we hear about all of these mystical, magical things that the cloud can actually do for us. And it's really difficult to think about what the cloud is exactly. I mean, I started learning off about the cloud about like 5 years ago, so that's still pretty recent. And I thought, wow, this is all pretty nice. What does the cloud actually mean? It offers us so many opportunities, but what is actually, below all of the resources that are offered to us? So if you think about it, basically the cloud in the end, of course, has to be infrastructure. It has to be hardware, because in the end, that is where we run our resources on. So the cloud basically in the end is these remote servers that sit in a data center. And these remote servers, they take care of storing data, managing data, and processing it. But of course, they offer us with many more opportunities as well, like the cloud provides us with infrastructure that we can run our software and platforms on. So you can think about not only data, which is obviously my specialization, but you can also think about hosting websites or running virtual machines, or maybe doing something with AKS, which is not my specialty, but I hear a lot of people, especially at the good company of Intercept, are really good with that. So Matt, I was wondering, you just said that you had like 16 years of experience. Do you still remember when you were learning the cloud?
I do. It was quite a while ago now, but it was a kind of slow progression. So my experience was more from on-premise infrastructure, so running things in VMware, so virtual machines in a server room in the office that I was in. But over time, kind of migrating things to the cloud, starting with things like email and Office 365. Was like sort of the first kind of step towards that kind of software as a service, hosting things off-site from our kind of actual headquarters premises.
Oh, that sounds really cool. I think that already helps a bit with what they say nowadays, demystifying the cloud. Well, as I already mentioned, what is the cloud? In the end, it is just infrastructure that is sitting in these data centers. And when we think about the cloud, usually we mean there are multiple data centers and they are connected to one another by using the internet. So that's pretty cool. What is also pretty cool about the cloud is that we can access it from anywhere in the world. So it doesn't really matter if I'm at home or here in the studio. I can access my cloud environment from just wherever I am, basically. So Gregor, could we go one slide forward, please? Thank you. So let's take a step back and think about it. what makes the cloud actually different from our computer? Because, well, hey, I just said the cloud was just infrastructure, right? So it's just some server racks in the data center, and they're connected through one another, like, so that they can communicate. So what is that really different from my computer? Why would I go to the cloud, instead of just buying a computer? Well, the first thing that's different is about location, right? So if I have my own computer, I'm using one right now, obviously, that is just a physical device sitting here at the studio. Meanwhile, the cloud refers to a network of remote servers that are typically owned by a third party. So we access that using the internet. Meanwhile, I access my computer from the location where I am. I mean, technically speaking, I could do that via a network, but then I would have to open up a significant amount of ports and stuff like that. So when you think about access, the cloud we can access from anywhere in the world, but my computer, I would need to have it here in the studio in order for me to be able to really access it. When you think about scalability, the computer that I have right here, that has kind of limited resources, right? So if I wanted to do more gaming, let's say I wanted to play Fortnite with Gregor and Matt and Simon, and this computer just couldn't take it, then I would have to buy maybe different graphics cards. And maybe in order to be able to download it, I also had to have maybe additional storage. So I have to buy some hardware and physically put that into the computer in order for me to be able to really scale. In the cloud, that is much more easy for us. So we can just go to our provider and say, hey, I want to have more resources. And then they will say, okay, that's fine. We just will charge you a little bit more, but we can give you these resources right away. So scaling up, scaling out, as they say, basically is really, really easy in the cloud. And let's think about some maintenance. Let's say my computer after some time breaks and I have to find out what is wrong with my computer, and I would maybe have to change some parts. Well, some people would argue they don't really want to change the parts. They just want to buy a different computer. That's up to them. But in general, when it comes to maintenance, so not only hardware maintenance, but also updates, backups, and security, we all have to take care of that by ourselves when we have our own physical hardware. When it comes to the cloud, however, that maintenance is usually handled by the provider. I mean, at least the maintenance when it comes to hardware, but also when it comes to, let's say, when we have a SQL server, then the patches and the updates are also done for us in the cloud as well. So we don't really have to think about that anymore, which is pretty cool, I would say. When we think about costs, and we will talk about that a little bit later on as well, usually when it comes to the cloud, we don't have any upfront costs. So we just pay for what we use. Meanwhile, when we think about my computer, it costs quite a significant amount in order to get a computer, especially with the MacBooks nowadays. Just a few €1,000 might not even be enough. So there are a lot of upfront costs when you think about your own physical hardware compared to the cloud. So let's consider an example of why we would even want to go to the cloud, right? So I like to think about it in this way. My boyfriend, for example, he has an audio company and they write audio software. And their specialty really is, in that audio software, and they can really do that quite well. But if they want to get that audio software to, the people that are buying their audio, they don't only have to think about what they are good at. So they don't only have to think about writing the software and how that would work with the audio, but they also have to think about the hardware that is lying underneath it and the hardware that is going to run on it. And they have to go to their customers and really implement it using that hardware. Meanwhile, that is not really their specialty, right? So with the cloud, you're lucky that cloud providers are saying, hey, your specialty, that's the software and the audio. But my specialty as a cloud provider is the hardware and the infrastructure that lies underneath it. So what they will do is they will provide that infrastructure for us and make sure that we don't have to maintain it ourselves. We don't have to think that much about, the security of the underlying infrastructure, because they will help us to get that up to par and make sure that the solution is running for all of these customers in a structured and, let's say, a good manner. So I think that's pretty cool about the cloud, that it enables us to really know, okay, well, I'm good at writing that software and I'm good with the audio, but I have another company that will back me up to really run that, like really run it on the infrastructure in a good manner. So I think that is pretty cool. We can go a slide further. All right. So we've thought a little bit about what the cloud is, but there are also different cloud models. Sorry if I'm coughing a bit. I got COVID like a few weeks back, so I will just mute myself whenever I cough, if that's okay. But if we can go one further, that would be great. Yes. So when we think about the cloud, we have these cloud providers, but there are basically 4 categories in which we can put cloud providers, so to speak, or how we can make our cloud solutions, I should rather say. So first of all, we have public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, and multi-cloud. And they will probably ask you this on the exam as well. So when you think about public cloud, this is usually built, controlled, maintained by a third party. So probably you've heard about these providers already. Like big public cloud providers are Amazon, AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. So these are the biggest public cloud providers, I would say. Do you guys know any other public cloud providers? Because I honestly couldn't come up with any other one.
No, Oracle's got their own public
Alibaba,
cloud,
I
yeah.
see somebody saying,
Yeah.
yes, that is very true. That is a big one as well. Totally forgot about it. Interesting. So yeah, the public cloud, as the name already kind of implies, is basically for everybody to use, as long as they pay for it, of course, but everybody can use these resources. The private cloud, on the other hand, is usually an environment where we reserve, resources for one specific customer. If we can go one back, Gregor, that would be amazing. Thank you. Yes. So this is basically the evolution of, what we had the data centers for, big businesses before. Now we would say we have the private cloud. So this can be hosted by a third party, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, I would say. So with public cloud, anybody can use the resources, but with the private cloud, the resources are usually reserved for one specific company. When we think about hybrid cloud, on the other hand, this is where we combine both a public cloud and a private cloud provider. It's not that difficult. But we do have to connect, of course, these environments to one another in order for it to make sense from one solution perspective. When we think about the multi-cloud, this is where we use 2 or more public cloud providers. So if we wanted to use 4 to include that Alibaba, then, of course, that would then be considered a multi-cloud environment. And this gives us really big flexibility and agility, I would say, because, well, if we have more cloud environments, then we can take account of innovation that is happening in one cloud environment versus another cloud environment, which I think is pretty great. So if we can go one further. So an example of public cloud things that we could do. Well, I would say there's actually a ton of things that we can do in the public cloud, but when we think about web applications or running virtual machines or even running big data platforms like Google BigQuery that some people might have heard about, or using Azure Databricks, then this can all be done in the cloud pretty well, I would say. Usually companies go with the private cloud when we talk more about storing sensitive data. So in the Netherlands, we have a lot of companies like governments or maybe even big banks. They have to, by law, store things like social security numbers and stuff like that. But these cannot just be stored in any cloud. They cannot just be stored in the public cloud. We really have to ensure that where we store our data, these resources can never, ever be shared with other companies. So in that case, in order to, apply to these regulations, in order to adhere to these regulations, I should say, we can decide to go with a more private cloud environment. Also, when we have legacy applications that don't necessarily fit well within the cloud, then we can decide to host that on the private cloud as well. Of course, sometimes you want to take, account of the benefits of this private cloud environment, but also the public cloud environment. And in that case, we can go to that hybrid cloud we just talked about. So I think that's pretty nice. So if we have applications that need to store really sensitive data, then we can put that part in the private cloud, and then we can, take account of that nice public cloud opportunity that we could have. And we could put the rest in the public cloud if we wanted to. We can also think about cost optimization because, well, if we have the private cloud anyways, these resources are usually reserved for us, right? So we could use that for more mission critical applications. And then if we need to scale up, we can do that using the public cloud, which I think is also pretty cool. When you think about going multi-cloud, so using multiple public cloud providers, that is usually done for more redundancy and resilience. Like, think about it. I think maybe a few months back, we were in a situation. I often use a data processing tool. It's called Azure Data Factory. Some people might have already heard from it if they, have some cloud experience, but if you don't worry about it. It's basically just a data processing tool. And what happened there was the computational power of Azure Data Factory comes from the integration runtime. But actually, for the entire West Europe region, they did a patch wrong, I think, or at least one server rack, something happened. And that meant that for that period of time, all of the integration runtimes for the West Europe region just went down. And that meant that all of the data flows that I had, all of my workflows couldn't be run unless, I go to a different region. If we were to have more of a multi-cloud environment, then I would also have had the option to run, these workloads, not on the Azure cloud, but maybe on Amazon or on Google if I wanted to. So that gives us a little bit more resilience in our workloads. It doesn't happen that often, but when something goes down on one cloud platform, then at least you have the opportunity and the option to run it on another cloud platform as well, which I think is pretty nice. By going multi-cloud, I would say we also avoid vendor lock-in. So we have a little bit more opportunity overall to pick and choose what tools we want. And if we are not happy with the cloud provider, we make sure that we can go to another one. That gives us, of course, flexibility as well. And if we are a little bit more pragmatic and we just want to use the shiniest, newest tools, I mean, a lot of people have been using ChatGPT, which I also make a lot of use myself. But when you think about the cloud, innovation happens there as well. For example, tools like Databricks, they always make sure that you have the latest version. So if I go multi-cloud and whenever Databricks goes with, a new release, then I can just use that. And if I want to use other things like Google BigQuery, then I can go to the Google Cloud. And that just really helps me to get, the most innovative tools whenever I want it, if I have more cloud providers. All right, we can go one next. So think about it for a second. We heard about public cloud, we heard about private cloud, and some combinations like hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. Is hybrid cloud in that regard a form of multi-cloud? What do you guys think? So let's think about that for a second, right? A hybrid cloud means that we're using public cloud and private cloud. But that does not necessarily mean that we're also going multi-cloud. So this is basically just a definition bingo that you might get on the exam. When you think about multi-cloud is only there when we use two or more public cloud vendors. So if we are in a situation that we have two or more public cloud vendors and we're also using private cloud, then we're talking about a multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environment. But if we just have one public cloud provider and one private cloud provider, then we're only talking about hybrid cloud and not about multi-cloud. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. If we can go one further, Gregor. Yes. So let's recap that one more time just to make sure that I got it right. So what does public cloud mean and what does private cloud mean? What are the benefits and what are the differences? So in the public cloud, we can use public cloud providers like Google, like Amazon, like Azure, Microsoft. And how we would pay for our resources is usually by paying for what we use. So that's what they call no capital expenditure. When we talk about private cloud, the resources are usually reserved for our company, which is also really great because that ensures that we never ever have to share these resources. And that's exactly what we want in order to adhere to these regulations. When it comes about control over resources in the public cloud, well, on the one hand, luckily, we don't have complete control over these resources. And that's also because the public cloud providers like Microsoft will help us with the maintenance, with the patches, etc., etc. But that also means, as an effect, that we have less control over these resources. When you think about the private cloud environment, well, all of these resources are reserved for us, right? And that usually also gives us a little bit more control over resources and over security. So that can also be quite a bonus, especially if you want to store this sensitive data, right? When we think about the public cloud, if you want to use more resources, that's usually never a problem. We just ask our cloud provider, for example, Microsoft, to give us a little bit more resources. And these are usually quickly provisioned. And if we want to use a little bit less resources, they are also usually quickly deprovisioned as well. In a private cloud, it's usually not that easy as in the public cloud because, as I mentioned, these resources are usually reserved for us. But that does ensure that data is not stored together with the data of another company. And that has its own advantages, I would say. If we can go on further. All right, so now we get a little bit more of a grasp on what the cloud actually is. But, I mean, we're here to learn Azure, right? So let's go and look at what Azure is. In the end, Azure is a form of public cloud. I don't think that would be a surprise to any one of us at this point, right? Azure is provided by Microsoft. Well, Microsoft is quite a big company. I don't think I would need to introduce that. The Azure cloud is actually quite a big cloud. I don't think it's the biggest one, though. But what is really nice about Azure is that we have loads and loads of data centers, not only in Europe, not only in the US, but we really have them all over the world. And we can connect to them, using the internet, and they are also connected to one another. And we might even have multiple data centers in just one region. I know, Gregor, you've been to a data center actually, right? How was that?
I didn't get in, unfortunately.
You didn't get in?
No, I was supposed to go, and then they changed the rules. So unfortunately, you can get tours of the outside of them now, but you'll never really get inside. You used to be able to get inside and walk up and down, but those days are long gone. Yeah.
That's too bad. Well, in the end, I can imagine it's just going to be a bunch of, data racks of servers and things like that. So, okay. Well, unfortunately, we cannot visit them anymore. I didn't know that. I'm quite surprised. But what is really good is that Azure does offer us a wide variety of resources. So at least we can access these, but we cannot go anymore physically. So when we think about resources, there are really loads and loads of resources. So it's good for you to know when you feel maybe a little bit overwhelmed. I don't know all of these resources myself. Like, my specialty is really on the data platform, and that's a specialty by itself. And Matt and Simon and Gregor, they will have different specialties as well. And they don't know the entire platform of Azure as well, I assume. But let's consider some examples. So when you think about compute, you can think about virtual machines, you can think about containerization like Azure Kubernetes services and stuff like that. But we can also think about more networking, virtual networks, load balancers, and VPN gateways. That's for sure not my specialty. But what is my specialty? Basically the storage and the databases, right? So we can think about storage accounts, which are basically like the storage on your computer, and you can store blobs, files, queues, and tables there if you wanted it to. And when you think about databases, there is a wide variety of databases that you can deploy, not only SQL Server, but also things like MariaDB and stuff like that. Or if you want to do Cosmos, of course, that is super hip and happening. And I would really recommend you check it out as well. Azure also has some big data analytics platforms for streaming, like Stream Analytics or IoT Hubs. But you can also go with Azure Synapse Analytics or something like Azure Databricks, which I'm really a fan of myself. So if you want to go into AI and machine learning, I would for sure check that out. All right, if we can go on further. So just to recap it real quick, what is Azure? Well, Azure is a form of the public cloud, right? So we had many, many data centers, not only in Europe, not only in the US, but throughout the world, and multiple data centers sometimes per region as well, which is pretty great. And all of these data centers, in the end, all of these server racks, they offer us a large variety of services, and they are all available for us over the internet, no matter where we are. They're quite cost effective in the sense that we only pay for what we use. Well, as I'm going to explain to you later, usually we only pay for what we use, but that's one of the big things about the cloud. So we don't have any upfront costs, but we just pay for the resources that we have. As I mentioned, we have a huge number of servers in data centers around the globe. And probably when you start browsing the internet or when you're on your phone, you're already using the Azure cloud without even knowing it, because a lot of these websites are hosted on Azure. All right, if we can go on further. And I would say one more, the consumption-based model. So when I wanted to talk about the consumption-based model, there was one thing that I wanted to talk to you about first, because I got a lot of questions about this on the exam. I don't know if Gregor, Simon, and Matt got these questions as well. I have to admit, I passed the exam quite recently myself. So, that's Gregor says, yes, we did. Yes. So it's really good to start talking about this, because this will be a question that most likely is going to be on the exam, and it's good to know. So what they say about going to the cloud is that we start going from capital expenditure to operational expenditure. So it's really good to understand what that really means. So what they mean with capital expenditure is that this expenditure is one time, it's upfront when we buy, let's say, the resources. So you can think about, when you think about, doing business, this is the expenditure that we have when we buy tangible resources. So think about buying buildings, think about buying cars, or even buying computers. When we go more to operational expenditure, then that's the cost of doing business. So what that means is, instead of buying a building, we're going to rent a building. Instead of buying a car, we're going to rent a car. And when we want to buy, these resources, then we're starting to use cloud services. So what they basically say about going to the cloud is that instead of buying all of these computers, all of that infrastructure, all of these servers ourselves, which are considered capital expenditure because we're buying tangible resources upfront, we're going from that capital expenditure to the operational expenditure in the cloud, because in the cloud, we only pay for what we use. So that's considered operational expenditure. If we can go on further. I'm seeing that Simon also got some questions on the exam about capital expenditure and operational expenditure. So I'm happy that I put that one in. I think it was quite important. So what they mean with the consumption-based model when we learn about Azure is basically, as I said, we don't have to pay anything initially, but when we start, when we don't have to pay anything initially. And what I mean with that is that if you create an account on Azure and you have your subscription, then we don't have to pay anything because there's no resources in there. But when we start deploying resources, let's say virtual machines or a database or a storage account, and we start putting data in there, then we pay for the things that we use. So we're usually not charged for idle resources. If we pause our resources and we don't use them, then we're also not charged for it. And we can remove or decommission the resources that we don't need anymore. And what that basically means is that instead of having that capital expenditure, so really having that upfront cost and buying all of the resources ourselves, all of the computers that we might need, now we're in a situation where we're basically renting the compute and we are renting the storage. And therefore we have that operational expenditure because we pay for what we use per month, basically. All right, if we can go one further. Yes. So as I already said about the pricing models, 99% for in the cloud, we have something that we call pay for what we use. So basically on-demand instances. And a good example of that is, for example, the storage accounts. So storage accounts, as I mentioned, are like your computer. And in the storage account, you can basically store any type of data, whatever you want, and you pay for the data that you store. So we pay for what we use on demand instances. But it's good to realize that with every rule, we basically also have some exceptions. So even though for 99% of the use cases, we usually have resources that are pay as you go, so on demand, we also have some different pricing strategies that is good to be aware of. So besides on-demand instances, we also have reserved instances, spot instances, and free tier resources. Well, free tier resources are, I would say the easiest to learn because, well, the resources are free. So when we talk about Azure IoT Hubs, which is a resource that helps us with data ingestion, basically streaming data. For example, when I stream data from my Raspberry Pi, let's say sensory data, or temperature data from my Raspberry Pi to Azure, I would use Azure IoT Hubs to do that streaming for me, which is pretty cool. But what is even more cool is that some resources like Azure IoT Hubs have free tier resources, which basically means that I don't have to pay anything for these resources. And that's pretty handy, especially for, development and debugging purposes, or just for workloads that, don't take that much resources or are not mission critical, I would say. But next to that on-demand pay-as-you-go instance and free tier, we also have reserved instances. So this is basically when we say, hey, Azure, I know that I have these workloads throughout, let's say 1 to 3 years even as a period of time. I know that I need, let's say, this virtual machine for the next 3 years. So I want to reserve these resources for that time. And that can be good for us because in that case, Azure will tell us, well, if you're going to use it for that long, I'm going to give you a pretty nice, discount on it. And then we pay less money, but the resources are then reserved for us for that time. So that makes it a little bit difficult to scale down, I would say. When we talk about spot instances, when we're like, hey, Azure, I do want that instance, but I don't want to pay the premium for it. I want to pay this amount. And then when we have a lot of idle resources, you would say that the price for these spot instances, that will go down until it hits that price that we want to have it. And at that point, the resources will start, being enabled for us and start running. And an example of these spot instances is, for example, we can do that with Azure Kubernetes Services or AKS, which is also pretty cool. So I would say in the end, it's good to know that 99% these resources that we have are pay as you go. So that means that we're moving from that capital expenditure, that upfront cost, that we used to have to buy all of these resources. We're moving more to operational expenditure where we pay for the resources that we use. And that is true for 99% of all of the resources. But in the cloud, Azure does offer us with different pricing models to utilize. So that was the conclusion that I wanted to give here. And then I think we will be ready for some questions.
Yeah, Lisa, we've already got a question from Emmanuel. He's asking, what is the length of time to consider reserved instance?
That is a good question. I think, how would we usually advise that to customers, Gregor? I would say if they're like 3 months or 6 months.
Yeah, well, normally it's like a year or
Either
3.
a year or 3 years.
Yeah. So, like, if you've got a virtual machine, I always say to customers, if you've got a virtual machine or you've got SQL Server and you know you're going to need this for your website for at least 1 year, then go with that. And then some companies who are bigger companies can afford 3 years. So 3 years, you get quite a lot of discount.
Yeah, like how long would you keep your resources running for before you would even decide to go for reserved instances?
It's a good question. Yeah. Sometimes you see people, some customers we have don't actually ever want to use it, and I'm not really entirely sure why. Some people forget to check that they can save money by using reserved instances. Some people also see it as like a contract that they're kind of getting into that they might not want to get into. There's all sorts of different things in play.
Yeah, I think that also makes sense because if you reserve it for a very long time and, after a year or so, you end up not having to use it anymore, then you still have to pay the remainder of what you reserved it for. So that's also not good.
True. The only other thing I'd add to that, though, is you're basically, so the way reservations work for virtual machines is you're just paying for that VM SKU. So if 6 months down the line you want to change what that workload is, you could destroy and rebuild the VM, put a whole new workload on. As long as you're still using that same virtual machine SKU that you've bought for the reservation, you'd still be able to use it. So if you wanted to say you had a 2012 R2 machine running on that SKU and you wanted to upgrade it to either 2016, 19 or 2022, as long as it's still using that same SKU, you'd still be able to use the reservation. So it's not bound to the virtual machine or the software inside of it. It's just the SKU based within Azure.
Would you not even be able to scale up in that case? Like use more resources? No.
You can, if you needed to do that, you can exchange the reservation and then you get a little bit of money back depending on how long you've had the reservation for. But yeah, ultimately, when we sell it to customers, we go, this is really for your production workloads that are going to be there and need to be run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that they are like business critical, and without them you can't run. So you might as well commit and make that contract, as you said, to Microsoft and say, we want to save some money because we need this workload for our business to run. So that's when it makes sense to, save some money and reserve the instance. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So if you're sure, do take advantage of it. But if you're not sure, then you have quite some downside. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Then I think I can give it to Simon.
Just before we move on, Emmanuel had another, I think, query around the hybrid cloud versus multi-cloud. So if you could maybe just go over that slightly again.
Oh, I don't see that question here. If you could be so kind to...
It was just a sort of, can you take that again, please? It was whilst you were going through the hybrid cloud. So unless I've misinterpreted what Emmanuel was saying, I think that's what they were after.
I can currently not find the question, but Emmanuel, if you're still having that in your mind, then feel free to ask it again, and we can take some time to cover it, I would say, at the end.
Yeah, we can come back to that if you want. Okay, so I think Emmanuel was basically wanting, when you were explaining the hybrid thing, I don't think he was getting it or she was getting it. I don't know if it's a man or a woman, so apologies. Maybe we could just go over hybrid real quick again, if that's all right.
Oh, what the hybrid cloud is.
Yeah.
What the hybrid cloud is and why it's differs from multi-cloud. I think that was the confusion was there. Sorry, my question was Unclear.
Okay, I didn't get that. Sorry about that. So basically, we have the hybrid cloud, and we talk about hybrid cloud when we have one public cloud provider and one private cloud provider, or at least a mix of the two. So that's when we say, okay, now we have a hybrid cloud environment, and we usually do that for solutions that have, for example, really sensitive data. So that sensitive data, in order to adhere to regulations, we would have to put that in the private cloud environment. But if we still want to utilize and take advantage of the opportunities that the public cloud offers us, then we can go with a hybrid cloud environment. So we have both a public cloud and a private cloud in a hybrid cloud environment. And when we think about multi-cloud environments, we need at least 2 public cloud providers. So the combination between AWS and Azure, that would already be considered a public cloud environment. And we usually do that just because we want to take advantage of the innovations that both of these clouds have, but also to just avoid that vendor lock-in that we have, and to ensure that our solution has more of a chance to keep on running. Because it doesn't really happen that often, but sometimes it happens that one of these clouds goes down because just something goes wrong in the software, for example. And in that case, we can switch immediately to the other cloud and run our workloads there to ensure that we're always up and running. And when we talk about hybrid cloud versus multi-cloud, then you could ask yourself, is a hybrid cloud environment also a multi-cloud environment? And the answer to that is usually no, because in order to have a multi-cloud environment, it's not sufficient to just have 2 cloud providers. It is the definition of that multi-cloud is that we have at least 2 public cloud providers. So if you just have one private cloud and one public cloud provider, that would be considered a hybrid cloud environment, but it would not be considered a multi-cloud environment. However, if we talk about definitions a little bit more, and we have 2 public cloud providers, let's say AWS and Azure, and would combine that with a private cloud provider as well, in that case, we would have both a hybrid cloud and a multi-cloud environment. So that's basically it. Thank you, Emmanuel. So I see one more question. So hybrid is 1 public and 1 private cloud. Multi-cloud is at least 2 public clouds. Multi-cloud hybrid is 2 public clouds and 1 private cloud, or maybe even more public clouds if you wanted to. Yes. Thank you.